Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 6th of June, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, the good news is it's bright sunshine in Plymouth, and reports are sunshine from across the country. So Norfolk, Hampshire, Rhondda, even Manchester with the odd little cloud apparently, and Glasgow. So sun is shining on the righteous, Mike.
Possibly.
Or possibly not.
Let's get started. This is the Civil Service Quarterly blog. This blog posting is written by Martin Donnelly, who's Permanent Secretary for the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills. He's ex-Treasury, ex-Northern Ireland Office, ex-Ofcom. He was stand-in head of the Foreign Commonwealth Office for a while, and he earns somewhere around £182,000 a year, which is quite reasonable, isn't it?
I think you'd probably get by.
Yeah. And he's saying, they're talking about regulators fit for the future is the blog post title. And he's saying the way the UK regulates has changed dramatically in recent years. The civil service has been exploring what the next wave of change for modern regulators might look like. And he says across the public sector, we're being challenged to work smarter. And we've got to be careful when we see that word, because it doesn't mean in a more clever way. It means with more IT and more data collection, big data and so on. So we're being challenged to work smarter, take advantage of new technologies and adapt. That goes for regulators as much as any other public body. Indeed, when regulators adopt new approaches themselves, they also build their capability to support innovation in the sectors they oversee. And who's driving this? Well, none other than the Cabinet Office, as well as the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills. And he says the reason for their focus is clear. The modern regulator can use technology to provide a better service for and reduce burdens on business. So that sounds very good. And they can get the best value for the taxpayer and drive innovation more broadly. So what are they talking about here? Data science. So they're talking about collecting huge amounts of data. And they give an example, which is Ofsted working with the Department of Education to explore the ways big data can predict and prevent decline in school performance. There you go. Big data is going to prevent decline in school performance. Nothing to do with standards or school or teachers being trained properly. Big data is what's going to do it. Algorithmic decision-making, Brian. Algorithmic decision-making. So computers can be programmed in order to automatically carry out a range of activities. This includes, for example, validating the completeness of data received by the regulator, or applying rules to categorize information and present analysis. And the example they give is the Environment Agency, their digital transformation work. He's saying that the agency is developing new approaches to environmental permitting, which will automate parts of the process based on online information submission. So I guess what that does is put civil servants out of jobs.
I would say so.
Yeah.
That's the plan.
Good. Data sharing, of course, right at the centre of this, where it's possible for multiple regulators to match up records they hold covering the same organisations. This unleashes many opportunities. Opportunities for what? It's a good question, isn't it? So, for example, it opens the option for businesses dealing with multiple regulators to tell us once, reducing the time spent sending similar information to multiple organisations. And Internet of Things is absolutely on this. So they're driving forward with the Internet of Things. They say that the Food Standards Agency is co-funding a programme of work on the Internet of Things and food safety, including a series of short pilot projects on issues such as transportation of food, temperature control and data standards. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the human race has existed for quite a long time, and over that time, for many years, we've managed to transport food, keep food safe, and not poison ourselves to the extent that we wiped ourselves out as a species.
That seemed to be the case.
But apparently we can't do that anymore without the Internet of Things.
No, we need somebody to teach us how to do this, and we need the Internet of Things to microchip everything.
Absolutely. So he ends up by saying we've taken an important first step in setting out what the future could look like and the benefits that new technology could bring. And he urges all regulators to continue to explore opportunities and so on. So we're becoming smart, which brings us nicely into the trade mission in India, which is going on right now. And this is to do with smart healthcare. So this is the Smart Cities Healthcare Trade Mission to India, being run by the British Council, of course. And the British Council some time ago was calling on the best of innovative British healthcare, the design, development and management of healthcare facilities, the setting up and running of high quality clinical services, training and education of staff in digital healthcare. What is digital healthcare?
Well, removing
fingers, removing fingers, is it? I don't know, but anyway, so smart hospital design is what they're talking about. Design digital hospital solutions and services, smart emergency and ambulatory care, population health analytics, automated quality and performance management of healthcare service delivery, smart health services, including remote monitoring, clinical decision support, smart healthcare education systems, 21st century clinical services, and sustainable solutions. So that's really what they're talking about. And here's the guy that they've wheeled out to talk about it. This is Sir Malcolm Grant, chairman of NHS England. And if we look down at the bottom of that poster there, if you can just see where I've put the ring around, he's talking about NHS Spine. So let's have a look at that then. Here is their infographic, The Spine. The Spine supports the NHS in the exchange of information across national and local NHS systems. It connects clinicians and patients to essential national services, including the electronic prescription service, summary care record, and choose and book. Because again, the NHS didn't work better 40 years ago before this stuff was in place. You've got to ask how much money is being spent on actual healthcare anymore.
Not a lot, Mike, actually, because as we know, as the privatisation continues, hospitals are paying back the PFI providers before they're involved in healthcare.
So we have a whole new industry going on here on top of all that. So let's look in a bit more detail then. The Spine is a collection of national applications, services and directories which support the health and social care sector in the exchange of information in national and local IT systems. The Digital Delivery Centre is the Health and Care Information Centre, oversees a number of key national applications and infrastructure for health and social care IT, including Spine. And we've said what that is already, connects clinicians, patients and local service providers and so on. It's used by the NHS 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That's brilliant. And it connects apparently 23,000 healthcare IT systems in 20,500 organisations. That's amazing. So this is what Sir Malcolm Grant had to say in India today. He said the UK has developed some of the most innovative healthcare services and systems in the world over the past 7 decades of the NHS. British expertise is ideally placed to play a significant role in helping India bring the best smart healthcare to its Smart Cities programme.
So we got the NHS, where Staffordshire hospitals and at least 10 other hospitals churning out bodies, death in the NHS system. We're privatising it to the point there's no money to treat sick people, and all of that's going to be exported to India. So it's the privatisation that's being exported with the smart element.
And the smart element possibly even bigger in terms of revenue than the privatisation part, because this is huge amount of money spent on huge IT systems. What is this about? It's about commoditising human beings. But it's not about commoditising healthcare in the way that the pharmaceutical companies do. This is merely about data collection and big data.
And taking it straight into the Indian subcontinent.
Yes. So
I think the word is nice at this point.
Well, indeed. Now, in a related subject, we've been talking about on the UK Column website, the Global Parliament of Mayors. And this article was published a couple of weeks ago by Martin Edwards. Well, he has followed up now on a new article, the Resilient Cities Programme, and it fits in very well with what Pippa King was talking about on Patrick Henningson's Sunday Wire programme. If you haven't heard that programme yet, have a look at 21st Century Wire and listen to the Sunday Wire programme from last night. But Martin Edwards in this article is discussing the Resilient Cities Programme, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, 100 Resilient Cities Project, London First, subjects like this. And we pretty much end up at this point, because this is Benjamin Barber, who's the founder of the Parliament of Mayors movement, democratic institutions all over the world are in trouble as an increasing number of people no longer believe in them. In this scenario, cities need to be brought into the center of the political order. Mayors all over the world have a common purpose when it comes to tackling law and order, terrorism and climate change. And what we're really demonstrating in this article is how these things are being used to drive this agenda, which is all about removal of the nation state and national parliaments, national sovereignty, and replace them with this pretty insidious form of global governance. And smart cities, smart healthcare, all part of that same agenda.
Because everybody's got to be logged, tracked, and the data constantly recorded.
Absolutely.
So what better place to go than to have a look at what's happening with the European Union. And some emails coming in to us. Somebody here is saying that he was watching John Major working himself up into a hissy fit this morning on the Andrew Marr show. I began to wonder why it is that people like him are so desperate to keep this country in the EU. And then I remembered he earns about £1 million a year from the Carlyle Group, an American arms manufacturer. Do you think it's quite possible that he's under orders to keep us in the EU because of TTIP? And the same goes for Ken Clark, who represents Anglo-American Tobacco. Well, it's interesting that people really beginning to pick up on the meat of the fact it is not just the European Union that's drifting its power into this country. The doors have to be opened in order for that power to come into this country. We could call it treason, many people do, but let's look at the people involved. And something very nasty with the Remain camp. There's been a number of incidents of the destruction of Vote Leave posters across the country. The Plymouth Herald's picking up on this, saying that UKIP's offered a £1,000 reward to catch serial Brexit signs being damaged. Pretty significant stuff. This is the actual picture from the Herald of the damaged sign.
Perhaps it was hedgehogs.
Could have been hedgehogs. Well, of course, as we'll see in a minute, our MPs think anything other than the EU is important. So there we are, something nasty about the people who think we should stay in the EU, and I shall have a bit more to say about that tomorrow. But this one really gets the prize because we've got Plymouth MP Johnny Mercer. Here we are on the Sunday Politics show. And he says that we've got to stay in the European Union. You've got to believe this, Mike. It is incredible. We've got to stay in the European Union in order to help vulnerable people. The society is judged on how it looks after its most vulnerable people. We have to remain part of the EU if we're going to continue to do that as best we can. This is complete and utter nonsense. So what does this man think? Well, he's military, he's ex-army. Let's just have a look at a bit of military stuff here, because we got the Herald saying that a Plymouth warship could be called upon to patrol the English Channel for migrants, and the ship is HMS Sutherland. This is the comment. The Border Force is reported to be in talks with the Royal Navy over the possibility of giving Sutherland the job of picking up migrants and dropping them off in the UK. Well, that's a good use of the military, isn't it? We open the doors to the migrants, and then we use the military to pick them up and drop them off.
Excellent.
Most other people would use a ferry, but we're going to use the Royal Navy. But the ship is HMS Sutherland, which is very appropriate because here's Peter Sutherland, KCMG, UN Special Representative for Migration, saying that the EU should be doing its best to encourage mass migration to undermine homogeneity of European countries. So presumably that's why they chose HMS Sutherland.
Indeed.
And the other part of the article is that the frigate is often used to escort Russian and Chinese warships sailing through British waters. Now, I don't know how often those naughty Chinese have been sailing through our waters, but it is a little bit ironic that it was the Navy themselves that were getting very excited because Chinese naval vessels have been arriving in Portsmouth. Was that an invasion that I wasn't told about, Mike, or did somebody invite them?
Clearly must have been.
Must have been an invasion. Well, we did mention this book last week, and a few people have got a little bit flustered because if you try and buy it, it can be very expensive. It's Christopher Story's The European Union Collective Enemy of Its Member States, a really excellent analysis of the creation of the EU. And Christopher Story's very astute in what he describes. Tower of Babel here, which of course is, this is what the Strasbourg building is mimicking, but you can download it as a PDF file for free. And if you freeze this frame, you can see the address. Well, on the subject of military, we're going to have a special 20 minutes as the end of today's news with a gentleman called David Ellis. He's going to be talking about what he's seeing going on at high level amongst retired military people in London and amongst the politicians. But here we are with a discussion going on about about Type 26 and Type 45 frigates. It's Tuesday the 7th of June in Portcullis House. The great and the good there, Lord West, Sir Mark Stanhope and Peter Roberts from RUSI. And what are they going to be discussing? Well, in public, they're going to be discussing why our warships don't work. And they're going to be discussing the fact the number of the Type 26 frigates is going to be cut from 13 to 8. So I find it very interesting, Mike, that you discuss problems with your military in public. So presumably those nasty Chinese are going to be present in Westminster to hear us describe what all the weaknesses of our military systems.
Probably, maybe the civil service is so full of holes these days anyway, it doesn't make any difference.
That's probably the case. Why are we interested in RUSI? Well, here is the gentleman who's going to be taking part, Peter Roberts. He's ex-Royal Navy, doesn't really say too much about his career, but basically he left the Royal Navy, went and did a degree, and now he's become an expert, and he's going back into Westminster advising the government.
Good.
Should have thought of that myself, Mike, actually. And this lady we were very interested in from RUSI, Dr. Karin von Hippel, because she's got a very interesting career, and of course she's now part of this organisation advising the British government. But when we delved into her, we were fascinating to find that basically way back in 1995, 97, she was being paid by the European Union in order to look at the decentralisation of political structures for a future Somali state. Isn't that remarkable, as we see Somalia ripped apart by war, that this very subject happened to be discussed by the London School of Economics. So is it coincidence? That's the situation. I think not. So we've got a think tank funded by who? George Soros, no idea, advising the British government now on what it should be doing with its warships. And we better pop in this man as well. Here he is, because this is one of the big wheels. We've got Malcolm Chalmers, and encourage you to go and have a look at this website to understand who it is really in control of policy in this country. It's think tanks funded by the international banking cabal. It is certainly not our politicians as a result of democratic debate in Westminster.
And of course, RUSI, the go-to experts for the BBC in particular.
Always. So on that happy note, we will move on to a video interview that I did Friday last week with a gentleman called David Ellis. There will be further airtime with David as he's talking about his understanding of what's now started to happen as senior military people, and particularly retired military people in UK, wake up to the fact they've been duped over the EU and the creation of the EU military. Thank you for joining us. I'm joined this afternoon by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives. And David, you've taken a break from your holiday to come and speak to us today about what's happening in defence in UK. So thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be with someone that actually wants to talk about UK defence in a positive fashion. So that's it's brilliant for me for somebody to be with somebody that wants to actually get to the root of what's going on in the UK.
And some pretty serious things are going on. I mean, obviously, I come from a military background, 21 years in the Navy, and I watch with absolute horror at the moment. As far as I'm concerned, we're seeing the destruction of UK defence and a pack of lies being told by government.
I mean, that's pretty much in short. And you're not on your own. Certainly, there's a great many in service, out of service, within the industry that's attached to it, which is obviously hand in glove, defence on one side, industry on the other. The two have to have equal regard. We can't have decent defence without decent industry, and we certainly can't have either without some sensible policy. And that's our major issue at the moment is what's going on with policy and money flows.
Right.
So,
well, I know that you've had some pretty extraordinary discussions over the last few months with some very senior, mainly retired military people, but you're also talking to MPs and indeed Lords about what's happening. Before we get into the meat of that, just tell the audience, if you will, a little bit about strategic defence initiatives and what you actually seek to do.
Thank you. Well, we set the company up originally around about SDSR 2010, which obviously we now know to be EU SDSR.
Strategic Defence
Strategic Defence Initiatives. The original concept, it wasn't so much a punt at Ronald Reagan and Rumsfeld and Bush and Co. with their SDSR. It was more with regard to Sir Francis Walsingham and him standardising the guns in the Elizabethan era to really bring forward British naval industry in a timely fashion to carry the day. So it was more about his strategic defence initiative and everybody that's come since, not the American.
Right, you've jumped right into the deep end there with a bit of history. I think what you're saying is that even going back to Elizabethan times, we had policy being formed.
To be pro, yeah.
And it had to be because obviously people had to see how much money was in the treasury, what we could afford to buy.
Yeah, the money flow.
The money flow, whether we built whatever it was in those days, cannons or ships at home, or we looked to source some of them overseas.
Yeah.
So you're saying that even going back from that time and following these strategic defence reviews forward, we see some very interesting things happening.
Yep.
So just come in on the company side and how you go about your business, who you talk to.
Well, the company's objective was to get to the bottom of what was going on, and more importantly, what was not going on with British defence and British defence industry and policy and money flow. So we wanted to look at the defence side, the investment, the industry, and what was going on in policy, and who, more importantly, who had policy control.
Right.
Control of that policy. And there was a huge void within party politics for sensible approach or even discussion or dialogue on anything that related to it being pro-UK or pro-Commonwealth. I see the two as hand in glove. It was all EU, realistically EU driven.
Right.
So the original outset was we did a top to bottom of how policy was working within the Conservative Party because they were the ruling government. Well, they were in coalition at the time, but then subsequently ruling government. So how that was working. And we did that in conjunction with talking to a great many MPs, ministers, ex-ministers, lords, and predominantly then on the officer side, on the Crown side, senior military officers from the ranks of general, admiral, and a few chiefs of defence staff, and notably, a few old lords that were still willing to talk about the problems that we'd realistically got. One of them of note, and they won't mind me mentioning, was Lord Tebbit, and how we could go forward. But there was an absence within predominantly not just within the Labour Party, but within the Tory Party to actually get to grips with this, because as soon as you start talking about defence, the majority of them just want to run off. They don't even want no chance. So that was the background in terms of what we tried to do as an overview, and from the meetings that we've took with senior staff, we sort of got the nuts and bolts end from the officers' side, and obviously there's not
this is military staff,
senior officers. So we got their point of view from an operational end of how they would implement policy and implement works, and how from Treasury through to government, through to the services, whether it be Navy, Air Force, Army, Royal Marines, whatever, how that would actually be implemented. And of course, most of them were just holding their hands up and going, this is just chaos. It's a nonsense. Yeah.
Right. So, as succinctly as you can, how do you see what is the situation at the moment? We should have a system where military specialists, senior military officers, admittedly working with private companies who would be developing new defence systems. Those people would work together, they decide what equipment is needed, and then presumably they'd be going to the Treasury to say we need the money to pay for these new systems. That's how I have always imagined it was. What have you discovered from your investigations and discussions?
Yeah, and this is from senior, straight from senior officers, that there's an unwritten pact between the parties that they can cut defence and use it as a cash cow to offset national budgetary shortcomings. And the term that we used originally was that the parties, particularly policy control, so currently that's Oliver Letwin and David Cameron, are drawing down upon, seem to be drawing down upon UK defence assets and personnel as if they were actually cash. And of course they're not cash. It's far more precious than that. So we've got a regard problem. Hang on a minute, we've got a looming conventional war, on one hand that we might have to combat, and then we've got a half an hour window of nuclear failsafe that needs to operate on the other, so balancing the two. So what we found was that all of the policy, all of the gearing, all of the Whitehall drive, and all of the mechanisms that are in government were all going towards ever closer military union. Now, this was something that was completely and utterly, 2 years ago when we first started trying to talk to people about this and challenging this, it was clearly obvious. And it was obvious to us because the original plan, tactic, strategy of how the European Union would progress over the last 76 years from its original concept, if you want, was that the original formula had only two components in it. It had monetary union, which we tried to have a go at in the UK and said no to. It was a disaster. But the monetary union process was done openly. And it was in front of everyone, and there was, a lot of debate with MPs, a lot of scrutiny, and obviously it was rejected. It didn't work. We got, the people there got their sums completely wrong. And it was a disaster. But the military union component of our subscribing to the EU treaties over the years since Rome, particularly with Lisbon, was that it was clear that the original concept of military union, economic union, actually went down in print in the Lisbon Treaty. So that was then, we've got quite a lag, some 60 odd years before it came out in the open. And even whilst the Lisbon Treaty has gone through and we've conducted, and Her Majesty's government has conducted the policy blending that it's contracted to do. So what that means is not just blending budgets, blending industry, blending the forces, which we're starting to see now with some of the flagging, some of the stickers on military vehicles, some of the joint exercises with EU.
Insignia.
Yeah. So, we're talking about EU NAV Force, so that's the EU Navy, EU Army Force, EU Air Force, and they've got all sorts of different names. Maybe they'll come and go in the next few weeks. That this hideously apparent to everybody that, that was, this, we're going up a direction here with the policy.
Which is EU military union.
It's ever closer EU military union. So what that means ultimately is that they will get control of the money flows. They have to, because the euro has got severe problems in Europe. The money distribution and the redistribution policy of finances hasn't worked.
Right.
It's stalling, and it's vital for them to prop up to continue with the project and the plan, that they need harmonisation of defence services and defence in the EU zone from a single point budget.
Right.
So that means coming to Brussels, not Whitehall.
Do our military officers understand what's happening?
Not the majority. The majority that I've seen currently probably no. It's a bit like, it's nothing to do with it. Well, of course it is. It is a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
Because the money flow through the whole plan, and control of the money flow, and then control of the policy is vital. It's a vital tactical component of ever closer union, that within that will be ever closer military union.
Right. Now, earlier on, you were talking to me about some really changes in the balance between the military and the civil servant and the civil service, in as much as senior military people going into the Treasury expecting to get Ministry of Defence agreed procurement programs signed off.
Yeah.
And they were met with a rather extraordinary.
Yeah, extraordinary. You know, we've got signed off projects, Nimrod, destroyers, frigates, aircraft. You know, we've got severe problems with aircraft manufacture now, which we'll probably come on to in a minute if we can. But the 18, I'm told, 18 billion pound bundle of defence procurement projects, which would have been predominantly BAE, Babcock, you know, and work for Portsmouth, whatever, you know, work for internal market. Treasury official says, no, you're not having that at all. Officer says, well, hang on, we're under government go. This is an agreed project. There's no way you're having that money.
So even,
Treasury,
even when the Ministry of Defence has agreed with the military
through the government
what it is, the Treasury then says, well, we don't care.
No, you're not having it.
So
there's no way.
This says that the Treasury is totally in control.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably one thing that Sir Nicholas Soames did sort of allude to in his feat, I think, on the keeping David Cameron to the 2% debate some time ago in the House of Commons. You know, the enemies are in the Treasury. There's an element of that, but it's probably deeper than that. Frankly, it really is deeper, because there isn't the parliamentary awareness amongst any of the parties. The majority of the MPs don't see this. They're not aware of it. The periscopes are not up, and they've not seen it coming, because there's severe consequences for our manufacturing, our industry, and our workforce. Ultimately, this is about, you know, people's jobs.
If we sleepwalk into this integration with European armed forces,
we will do, because, well, hand in glove with blending the policy means blending the Army, Navy, and Air Force. So this isn't a question, and then one thing that people are starting to become aware of, thanks to some great media work by Veterans for Britain, Julian Thompson, a couple of guys like, you know, that are airing this, that the policy control will dictate where the money's going. So it will dictate where the work is going. So it will be through from capital budgets, you know, your cardinal sort of values now. Your capital procurement budgets from top to bottom. We're going to have, you know, we're going to want a squadron of whatever, frigates, destroyers, whatever. But that will be from an EU perspective. So what we'll end up with is very much more of the problem that we've inherited from the 1957 Duncan Sandys white paper review on defence and single point, ironically, again, single point control with the creation of BEA, was that the pre that we had successful companies that manufactured timely goods that worked to market.
So we've got British industry producing the gear, creating jobs at home.
Yeah.
But with the new system, what will happen?
And we now know that the whole gambit with the Sandys paper was that it was about blending and harmonising manufacture. Predominantly, his big thing was predominantly aircraft. So what we've gone from is manufacturing aircraft in the UK with jobs here and money flows here in the UK and perhaps Commonwealth to EU. So it was Panavia was the first big pan-European defence industry, and we can call it, you know, we can say now, you know, ever closer union of defence manufacturing.
Yeah.
So that went into Italy, Germany, France, and so on.
That's the Tornado project.
Yeah. So we now, you know, that was the gambit there. So what we saw in Britain was a huge loss. We've lost TSR2, we lost our rocket programme with Black Arrow and Blue Steel, all gone. You know, that's now Ariane. And we've seen our aircraft production, civil-wise, from de Havilland, basically the majority of that has been stripped away and has gone into Airbus. You know, and there's this, you know, BAE may or may not hang on to the wing manufacturer, so we may well lose that as well. So where we need a prime industrial driver with manufacturing and engineering to produce the equipment, to keep our workforce together and carrying on, and keep our internal money flows going. We've got a huge debt problem, which is apparent, and to say it was huge is an understatement. Of course, you know, it's beyond huge. we need growth, and the only way we're going to get growth, if we're serious about this, and the politicians are serious about it, is to use the industry and the driver properly, and they're not using it properly. And this is fundamental with then, of course, that's not working properly. Parliament isn't working properly. The MPs are not working properly. The majority of them are not.
They haven't got their eye on the ball.
They're not.
With this happening.
No. I mean, we've even within the last 6 months, even before we've had some very successful airing of this in mainstream press. With it's being referred to as EU army, but it's obviously that's a colloquialism. It's a catchword. It's EU, ever closer EU military union. It will be. They're not going to create their own army. They're going to blend ours. And this is one of the things that was apparent with some of the conversations I've had with serving middle-ranking and senior officers, that wasn't even it wasn't even apparent. But they're not. The EU are not going to conscript their own army. They're going to blend ours.
This is a major change going on, as I see it, by salami slicing. So politically, we're not declaring the agenda, which is EU military union. It's not, all happening by small slices.
It's not out in the open. It's not being conducted anything like the exchange rate mechanism. So
I'm going to just push you on this one, David. So when you talk to senior officers, and this is a very, very serious issue, because what we got is the loss of Britain's strategic capability to have the industrial base to produce the defence. That is all being sucked out of the country because of it's going to be divided across Europe. What are senior British military officers saying? Do they understand it? Are they ignorant? Are they too frightened to speak out? What are they doing?
They're very quickly becoming to understand it. It's been something that's been completely off the radar, because the original gambits from going back to immediately after the Ted East took us into Rome with the Knott Review in '81, it was just devastation for most of the services. And where Knott should have cut the infrastructure, not the hard frontline edge of ships, men, planes, and so on, the infrastructure should have been cut, not that. But obviously, knowing what we know now, there was a policy drive from controlling the money in the industry to go down this road of ever closer military union.
And one of the things that I've been told by several sources is that the problem with British military was we were actually too strong.
Yeah, too strong.
So we had to be reduced in size in order to make it easier to achieve the dovetailing with the EU system.
Absolutely.
Last point, David. We're also hearing mutterings about EU Treasury at the moment. It seems to me that if we end up with an EU military and an EU Treasury, Britain ceases to exist as a country. Is that too strong?
No, it's not. It's not strong enough. I mean, everybody out there has got to realise that this is of primary importance. This is when everybody has got to participate and precipitate with this, because if you value living under a democratic system, which is, we're borderline losing that, then your only platform now under the referendum is to vote no in Brexit. If you're happy to live under a tyrannical dictatorship with an unelected commission, then stay in the EU. It's as simple as that. Yeah. So you take your choice. Do you want to continue with a democratic way of living or an undemocratic way of living?
Right.
But on the military front, of course, because it's been unchallenged and it's been not discussed, and clearly now we're seeing that the makings of STSR 2010 and then the previous STSR and then the George Robertson's review was that it was to end up with an acceptable blending rate or merger rate of forces that was acceptable to join. The drive within Whitehall was to join.
Right.
It
so
wasn't
what
to not
you're saying
join.
is that behind the scenes for a very long time, since the concept of the European Union, there has been this hidden policy to manipulate Britain's defence reviews and defence plans in order to achieve where we are now, which is at the cusp of a full integration with EU military.
Yeah. But we always, from my background and discussions with all of the the senior officers and lords and MPs is that it alludes to the Strategic Defence Cuts Review. It was all about cutting.
Cuts.
That is a fact. That was about cutting. We are where we are. We can join up all the dots on the graph and see, this was the original course, this is where we're ending up, and this is how they've got there. And those reviews were not about positive British industry and Her Majesty's Armed Forces. It was all about cutting. And the problem we've had, of course, is that cutting defence cuts industry. It's blatantly apparent.
Yeah.
And we've had an absence politically from all parties with the regard for British manufacturing, British jobs, British industry, which would have given us the driving and the growth. And of course we've not, because obviously that's going to be done from an EU level. It's not going to be done from a UK level. It's an EU perspective.
Right. Lastly, because I know that you're short of time today, is message for whoever you like. It could be the general public, or it could be those retired military officers that you've spoken to. What would you like to see? Let's pin it down. What would you like to see Britain's military doing at the moment? How should they deal with a government which is essentially not telling the truth?
Well, the debate's got to come out in the open, and it's got to happen now. We can't have more of this cloak and dagger stuff, and the comments I understand on David Cameron's Facebook was, we're not having an EU army. So it's not the right phrase for a start off, because it's frankly, that's not the right words, and words count, and we should use the right words. So we are currently under contract within Lisbon. So Her Majesty's government is currently contracted to blend to ever closer military union.
Yeah.
And that's a fact.
Right,
now,
so we need to get the whole of that debate out into the open.
Yeah, because there are huge consequences, not just to Her Majesty's Armed Forces, who I believe fundamentally, with the general public, will not, if it was put to them and aired correctly, support this direction.
Right.
So that's the main thing. So the MPs have got to start doing their job, and we've got to stop this nonsense of continually waging Russia as the big bad threat. That's a complete nonsense. Yes, anybody with a weapon, poses a threat. There are risks whether you're, anybody that's around you with armed services, and they have to be assessed. So let's stop using them as an argument, because the initial change to us is how we're going to actually hang on and retain Her Majesty's Armed Services and what little industry we've got, because this is the key thing. If we carry on post the referendum vote is not a vote for the status quo. It's a vote to carry on full throttle. Is that what will be the consequences for BAE and what little industry we've got left, and what will be the consequences for Rolls-Royce?
And steel is about to go.
And steel. We've already seen the stripping out. This whole EU concept is redistribution of people, redistribution of money. Fair enough, the Germans haven't come up with, haven't done that, but the redistribution of people is blatantly apparent. The migrants are desired, they are wanted. Let's have them in. It's not let's keep them out, let's have them in.
Yeah.
So militarily wise, we've got to, if we're serious about this, we've got to challenge, scrutinise, and look at just exactly what's involved with going down this route. And it's in black and white in Lisbon, so we can't not keep doing this under the carpet. It's just not acceptable. So the MPs have got to start doing their job.